Hi.
Hello there.
David and I have watched some clips from a recent David Splane talk from the 2021 annual meeting at the encouragement of others. Splane in this video indicates that some folks came into the truth or learned the truth from a certain book called the Harp of God. So you could just show them that book.
This is the 1928 edition. I believe you have the original 21.
Yeah, we have various and lots of different years, which we will get into in another video. But that particular book did catch my interest when someone said he was talking about the Harp of God, because the Harp of God was instrumental in my leaving the witnesses, finding out the truth about the history of the Watchtower. So we thought to watch the video and see what he had to say. And within the video, we found at least 5 deceptions. I don't know whether or not David Splane has read the book or read it recently, but whether intentionally or unintentionally, he has presented some deceptive ideas in his presentation on the Harp of God, or On the Way to Holiness was the talk title.
He could be just like so many we've met on the way out, and even within the organization, just deceived himself.
Yeah.
Most of us have only heard these books' titles, and they're not even available in Kingdom Hall libraries anymore, as they were in my day, by the way.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that it's referenced now when they've cleared them out of the Kingdom Hall libraries.
But they're presented as part of our glorious past of unique proclamation. And yes, they were, but not in the way you think.
Right. So the first deception that David and I noticed was reading back into the history into, like, from the current history, kind of reading back the current ideas and putting them in the past. So this in connection with the FDS, or the faithful and discreet slave. You know, there was no class, there was no collective, but it's kind of presented as if there was.
It's that the organization, specifically the faithful and discreet slave, brought forth these publications which became a great blessing and brought millions of people into the truth.
Yeah. But do you know that in that time the FDS was Russell, or Rutherford later, but like, he was the only one writing and presenting the books and signing the books. So really what you were getting in the very early days, you were getting the ideas of one man, his comments, and then later the ideas of another single man, Rutherford, in his publications. So it's really the mental meanderings of Rutherford, in the Harp of God.
So they're presenting it in the video. David Splane is as this is God setting up a faithful and discreet slave. We'll get to that in a second. And reading back the theology of the present into the past, what actually was happening is that 2 men were writing pretty much all of the literature. There are a couple of exceptions. All the way into the 1940s. Yeah.
The second deception is that he says that first of all, he leaps over 1919 when he says the FDS was appointed. But he leaps from 1919 to 1921 in the publication of the Harp of God. But he forgets that there is a publication before that, which was a really big campaign. I remember it being bragged about when I was a witness. But I'd never read the book, and I guess I didn't stop and think too much about it. But now it's even worse when you hear the title.
Yeah, here it is. Millions Now Living Will Never Die, published a year before the Harp of God.
1920,
but far more significant in terms of the time. They brag about the fact that they've circulated several million of this book in those 5 years between 1920 and 1925. Later they brag that they've circulated 6 million of the Harp of God. Actually, David Splane mentioned that. 6 million of the Harp of God.
Yeah. So why didn't he mention this one? I think even the title, just reading the title is going to stick in your throat. Millions Now written in 1920, will never die.
Millions now living will never die. Now, you console yourself, at least before 2000 you did, that some of that generation that saw 1914 were still alive. But that's not the claim.
Yeah.
This, therefore, becomes a false prophecy. It's the campaign slogan for those 5 years. And it's reproduced in the Harp of God.
And the fact that we kind of bought time for ourselves by saying some of those that saw it, and then there was lots of talk about how many had to be alive that saw 1914 to soften the blow, really. But you're not aware that that's happening. There's a manipulating going on along the way. So that was number 2. Number 3 was the fact that he states that the appointment of the faithful and discreet slave happened in 1919. Well, that's not the claim of the Harp of God.
The Harp of God claims that C.T. Russell was the faithful and discreet slave, and that he undoubtedly served that function, and that his appointment had occurred shortly after the invisible presence of Christ began in 1874. So, again, does Splane know this? I don't know. I don't know if he's aware of the chronology. I wasn't until much later.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's a deception which is easy to trace. All you have to do is look at the book itself, and you'll quickly see that Russell fulfills that appointment because something significant happened in 1874. Christ came invisibly, and Babylon fell in 1878.
And in the Harp of God, up to 1927, Rutherford is claiming that he is the faithful and discreet slave. Just him, Russell.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And then suddenly it's dropped. So this edition I have, 1928 edition, it's gone. Now, we have talked about that in a previous video based on David Reed's J.W. literature book.
Then the 4th thing that we noticed was the claim was that this book, The Harp of God, was for beginners and that it had simple truth in it.
Yeah.
Now, if you know anything about the history of the Watchtower, and this continues in the train of thought that Russell and Barber's chronological system was accurate and truthful, and so they present this very elaborate, very hard to follow chronology. You've done a lot of videos on Russell and Barber and their theories. So their ideas were not simple. They were more complex than our 1914 Last Days scenario that we present, which I thought I can't explain.
Which involved the 1799 Last Days, the beginning of the Last Days, 1874, but a lot of other dates up to 1874, 1878 for Babylon, and the closing of the Heavenly Calling, 1881, etc. Right up to 1910, 1914, we've dealt with this in some detail. But to claim that it's simple and that it was designed, this book was designed for beginners, this is presented as truth.
And when you read the book, the centerpiece of the book is that 1874 is the beginning of the invisible presence.
Everything really depends upon that date, just as it now does upon 1914.
And the fact of the invisibility is the reason why Rutherford could eventually make the claim that God has one organization.
Yeah, because in 1874 he started to use one man, and that one man became the Watchtower Society, then the society becomes the organization.
Yeah.
You can see how it all flows from the idea that God was uniquely using Russell.
Yeah, yeah. So none of these truths, according to that book, are truths anymore. We don't believe them as Jehovah's Witnesses, not now. So, anyways, we'll go to number 5.
Well, there's going to be more detail about all of this in our later
we're going
taking
to
segments from the book itself.
Yeah. Read quotes from the book, but we just thought we'd set it up this way. So the 5th one was that Splane here does do something that is consistent with the Watchtower history. He says, encourage people to study the Bible. Offer Bible studies. But when you do that, what do you end up studying? You study publications. Yeah. And that has been the true history of the Watchtower. The early people were studying Russell's words. And there's quotes even that say, without Russell's works, you wouldn't understand the Bible.
No.
You need them. So they still believe that. So they're consistent.
They were originally called the International Bible Students. That was their identity, even in the days after Russell had died. But that's why Rutherford had to find their modern identity.
Yeah.
But at no point have they ever been Bible students. No point. Because we know from our own history, we were indoctrinated ourselves by the study of one book, which is the 6-month program that I myself followed in 1970.
So when you think about it, really, you are committing to one man's ideas. They originally were committing to Russell, his ideas, as presenting truth. And then later it was Rutherford. Rutherford wrote all those early publications.
There's one book.
And a lot of the thinking is still like Rutherford.
Oh yeah, he's far more influential in the modern thinking of Jehovah's Witnesses than Russell is. But on the other hand, without Russell, there would have been no Rutherford and no organization concept.
Yeah.
So I think there you have to see that the names disappeared off the books only in the 1940s after Rutherford was dead. This authorship by committee, though, obviously doesn't work either. All it ends up doing is recycling all of the old ideas
Or hiding
till they become inconvenient.
Whoever's writing it, because Franz wrote a lot of the later books, right? Anyways, this book. So today they still offer Bible studies, but they're really offering publication studies. That's what they mean. And they say it's by means of these publications that people learn the truth.
Learn the truth.
They can't learn it on their own.
I think it's far more obvious now than it even was in my day that that's the case, because nowadays they're actually actively discouraging Bible study. And if you did Bible study, you know, those of you who've already left know, when you actually get around to doing personal Bible study and believing what the Bible says,
you don't come to those conclusions.
You leave. Yeah. And they've even admitted it inadvertently a few times, haven't they?
Yeah. So this book was very instrumental in me finding out the truth. So I can claim that, because it gave me the truth about the history of the Watchtower. I learned all kinds of things that I did not know about the history of the Watchtower by reading that book. And the dogmatism came ringing clear. That they present everything with words like undoubtedly, without a shadow of a doubt, very dogmatically.
The insistence is the thing I think that drives it home when you actually read Rutherford's way of writing. Russell was not nearly as dogmatic, although he was very opinionated. He didn't state things dogmatically like this man Rutherford does. But it looks like Splane got the title of his video, his presentation
talk,
from the book.
That's right.
Whether he read it or not, I don't know, but he seems to have read this page.
The Way of Holiness is referenced in the latter part of the book, so you were going to read where it's mentioned. Page 339 and 340.
This is the last chapter of the book, called Restoration. If you've seen the David Reed video, you know there's 10 chapters. This is the last one. This is where they get their concept of the Harp of God from 10 strings, etc. This is the last string. And it presents this concept. It says on page 339, the prophet Isaiah thus wrote, "A highway shall be there, and a way, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it, but it shall be for those. The wayfaring men, though fools, shall not err therein." I like that. That's Isaiah 35, verse 8, by the way. Which, of course, chapter we still use, right, in our Paradise promises about the lame leaping and the blind seeing and the deaf hearing, etc. And then it goes on. It will be noticed that there is a way to go over this highway, and it shall be called the way of holiness. And then, at the bottom of the page, they say, because Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all other faithful prophets described by the Apostle Paul in Hebrews 11 are promised a better resurrection, because of the statement of the prophet that they shall be princes or rulers in all the earth. And here they reference another familiar text if you're a J.W. Elder, princes in all the earth, Psalm 45:16. It is to be expected that they will be the first ones raised under the terms of the new covenant. Therefore, it is reasonable to expect them to be back on earth at the beginning of the restoration blessings. Hence, these faithful men may be expected on earth within the next few years. And that's another reason he's not referencing this. Because in this book, they're very explicit as to when that will be, 1925.
Yeah.
And the evidence is that after that prophecy failed, a great many of the people who had been loyal to Russell fell away from the organization.
So, Splane's comment... Oh, did you have more?
Still more, though.
Oh, okay.
Hence, these faithful men may be expected on earth within the next few years. They will constitute the legal representatives of the Christ. Notice that, the Christ, in the earth.
Yeah, because
the
they
anointed.
believed 144,001 made the Christ.
Yeah. They will be the visible representatives of the kingdom of heaven. These are the ones who shall administer the affairs of earth under the direction of the Lord. So they've doubled down on what they've said in Millions, that it's within a few years.
Yeah.
And then in The Way to Paradise, written actually not by Rutherford, but by Van Amberg in 1924, they doubled down again on it.
Yeah. So these, he says people were attracted to the organization, to the witnesses, because of these truths in this book. And they're based on proclaiming a false prophecy. Would people be attracted and brought into the truth through a false prophecy?
Which aren't in the Bible, but are in the book. I.e., there's really two of them, right?
Yeah.
The one is the Millions. Millions now living will never die, which couldn't be proven to be a false prophecy in 1925. But the other one could. That the ancient worthies...
We're going to be resurrected in 1925, according to Millions.
So those who believe this stuff in 1920-21 would have been disappointed for sure.
Yeah.
But they couldn't know that the emblem, the emphasis upon the millions now living will never die. They could not know that would be totally nullified and would turn out to be the biggest embarrassment in Watchtower history.
Another point that he made was that this was the book whereby people would learn who Babylon the Great was and to leave her. And they claim that's Christendom. But Christendom wasn't teaching these things. Christendom wasn't guilty of these false prophecies.
No, I'm not saying there's no eccentrics in the church. There are people who make false prophecies. There still are. But they weren't in the commentaries on Daniel and Revelation and Ezekiel. It wasn't the main men in the church that were making false prophecies. It's the fringe pastors.
Yeah.
And they're never taken much note of.
Yeah, and
by the great majority.
Yeah, they're not taken seriously, especially later. You don't hear from them anymore.
That's right.
But with the witnesses, they just carry on.
Yeah. So we wanted to link, I know, a couple of...
We're going to link a playlist that we did called Have Jehovah's Witnesses Ever Been God's Organization? And then we'll link the first of one of a series of 3 that we did within that videos called... what was it called? Is JW Org a prophet? Review the record.
Review the record, which is what the Watchtower invited us to do back in my day.
Yeah. So we'll
unbelievable.
do in those videos.
Unbelievable. And you can only assume that people who wrote those articles that I remember reading at the time had no idea what was in the books. No. And so we can give the benefit of the doubt to David Splane and most of the modern leaders. They have no clue either. Yeah. All the more reason we have to do some archaeological work here to actually put before the public what's in those books, which are generally not available anymore. It's
misleading, nonetheless.
So we'll see you in those future videos where we actually get into the text of the Harp of God, not just in the first editions, going through to 27 when they abandoned the Russell FDS connection, but in the later editions too. What was changed? So in future videos we hope to highlight that. See you then.